Good evening and welcome to Lecture A of the Professor Rajani Prasanna Endowment Lecture Series. Today, we are going to talk on low carbon emissions and its resilience. I would like to introduce you to Mr. Julian Wen, who is the HOD of the Department of Social and Health Innovation at the Prasanna School of Public Health. Julian is a seasoned expert in innovations and design with a passion for social impact, health and well-being, as well as democratic and environmental challenges. With a multifaceted profile, he has worked in a business environment, both large companies, startups, in private sectors and policy-making domains in ministries of European Commission public services. He has also worked in the academic domains across universities, research labs, and in the civil society's domain, NGOs, association, cooperatives. As a social entrepreneur, and a researcher, Julian develops comprehensive approaches involving scientific and strategic thinking, especially for public policies, research, or business development, as well as innovative methodologies for the design, development, and implementation of innovations, with a particular focus on digital products and services. He manages his own company, Malsama Mind, and is currently head of the Department of Social and Health Innovation at Prasanna School of Public Health, Mahe, Manipal, India, and is also affiliated with the United Nations University. He is the board of directors of several international non-profit organizations, such as ECH Alliance and its Digital Health Observatory, the Digital Health Society, and the Global Health Connector Partnership. He is the member of the WHO initiative ATASH related to the development of low carbon and resilient healthcare systems. His research activities are related to digital transformation, data and AI governance and trustworthiness, digital democracy, behavioral science, health and well-being, public and global health, environmental sciences, and green health. His significant publications include Behavioral Changes During COVID-19 Confinement in France, a web-based study, NDPI/International Journal of Environmental Research and Public Health, published on November 14, 2020, Global Open Health Data Cooperative Cloud in an Era of COVID-19 and Planetary Health, OMICS, a Journal of Integrative Biology on October 13, 2020, Digital Transformation and Governance, Innovation for Public Biobanks, and Free or Libre Open Source Software Using a Blockchain Technology, Omics, a Journal of Integrative Biology on May 1st, 2020, Large-Scale Sustainable Development of Digitally Enabled Innovation for Health and Care Delivery to the Aging Population, European Commission on 1st October 2018. Now, I would like to introduce you to our editor and Dr. Neeti Rao, who is not common to WHO. Dr. Neeti Rao is an adjunct faculty at the Institute of Public Health, Bengaluru, and is also a health policy and systems researcher, consulting and providing technical support in strategic planning, policy designs, implementation, and evaluation, including impact assessment for governments and international agencies. Most of our professional work has been in and around the health system spaces that focuses on governance and policies, particularly in the Indian health policy ecosystem. She is also a consultant at the WHO, supporting the health system governance and policy unit at WHO in the development of normative work on participatory governance and policy, and its applications in countries, particularly in the Southeast Asia region. As a policy and systems researcher, she is working on the impacts of climate and environmental governance on public health. As a health systems consultant, she has worked on evaluation of health systems portfolio of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation in India, the George Institute for Global Health, New Delhi from August 2019 to Jan 2020, preparation of policy document, National Framework for the Multi-Sectoral Action for Ending TB in India by 2025 for the International Union Against Tuberculosis and Lung Disease. Dr. Neeti has also worked in the development of research strategies, studying health effects of air pollution in Bengaluru city, an analysis of government-sponsored health financing in the context of UHC in India. She has also worked as a policy analyst and health systems advisor to RTI International in April 2021, while monitoring, evaluation, research, and learning consultant, the George Institute for Global Health, New Delhi, from April 2021 to present. Some of her notable publications are Beyond Numbers, Coverage, and Cost, Adaptive Governance for Post-COVID-19 Reforms in India, which is published in the BMJ Global Health. Identification of publicly available data sources to inform the conduct of health technological assessment in February 28, 2018. Towards health in all policies, rapid health impact assessment of policies in select ministries of governance of India with reference to non-communicable diseases submitted to the World Health Organization Country Office India by the Institute of Public Health on June 1st, 2015. She's also worked on the understanding dynamics of private tuberculosis pharmacy market, a qualitative inquiry from the South Indian district, which is also available on the BMJ Open, published on January 24, 2022. I would now like to hand over the platform to our HOD, Mr. Julian Wen, to begin his presentation on low carbonization, especially in the healthcare sector. Healthcare sector being one of the most important sectors where everybody comes to get treated, and how do we reduce or its impact and ensure green, healthy environment. Over to you, Julian. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rahul. Good morning or good afternoon, everybody in India. I'm based in Europe for this week, so it's the morning for me. Thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you to Dr. Niti to accept the moderation as well of this session. And I would be pleased afterwards, after the presentation, to answer a few questions. So if you have some questions, please keep them or note them in the chat, and I think we will have time after the presentation to answer them and to discuss them. So my presentation will last more or less 30 minutes, half an hour. So I will share my slide. Can somebody just confirm me that we can see my screen?
Yes, Julian, we can see your screen.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So yeah, the topic of today is to talk about the decarbonization of healthcare systems. And it's perhaps an original point of view compared to previous lectures in this honorable session and series of lectures under the Professor Rajani Prasanna endowment. Because usually we are talking about the effect of climate change and the effect on environmental changes on health, and this is a very important topic. But here today I will try to talk about the reverse approach, about the effect or the impact of healthcare systems as a whole on the environment, on the climate, and specifically the question of greenhouse gas emissions. And at the same time to talk about how these healthcare systems, which are crucial, of course, for the development of societies, can be more resilient, because we know, of course, that a lot of changes will happen in the upcoming years. And so I will start my presentation actually to talk about this climate change, to make a few reminders. First reminder, and I will be quick on this question of the situation on the environment. I have an echo, sorry. I have an echo somewhere. Yeah. Can cut your mic, thank you. So first reminder, a few years ago, in 2015, some colleagues from Stockholm in the Stockholm Resilience Center established this diagram, this graphic, around the 9 planetary boundaries. We know that our planet Earth is limited. It's limited in different dimensions, different aspects, and you see on this diagram the different limits, the different boundaries that our planet has. And actually on this graphic, the idea was to represent in green the safe areas for each of these boundaries. In yellow, when we start to cross a threshold, which generates some risk for the humanity and the nature on Earth, and in red, when we are really overshooting the limits, and it becomes really critical to reduce our effects on these limits or boundaries. So we can see that we have crossed the line in several of these dimensions. Climate change is only one of these dimensions, but the question of acidification of ocean, for instance, is very important. The biogeochemical flows as well on Earth are critical for the sustainability of the world. The way we are using land system, the way we are using water, and fresh water in particular, and the way we are polluting potentially our atmosphere. So all these things are very important to monitor, and actually they are monitored regularly. But we see that here that we have crossed the line in many aspects. So we had actually last month in March a publication from the IPCC, so the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. I remind for the one who don't know this organization. IPCC is a non-profit organization. It's including thousands and thousands of researchers and scientists across the globe. And the idea is not to produce research, but to do a summary of the existing research, published research, peer-reviewed research in scientific journals, and to explain us around the climate change, what is the situation and what could be the solutions for the different challenges we are facing. So it's a very important group, of course, and the publications every year are always confirming the diagnostic that has been established since the beginning, actually, of this group. IPCC was created in the 90s. So a long time ago, 30 years ago, and every year it's confirming different aspects of the research on the evolution of the environment and climate change. So first conclusion I want to highlight for us to have in mind for this presentation: we are responsible for the global warming. When I say we, us human, and our activities are unequivocally, and this is a citation of this report, we are causing the global warming. So we are the responsible in the room. The humanity is the killer of the planet, and we have no doubt, or at least the science globally in the world has no doubt about the fact that human activities are responsible for that. And of course, it generates a lot of adverse impact and losses to the nature, of course, but to the people, this global warming. So we can see and touch all the consequences of this climate change. Of course, some heavy drought. We have as well fires. These are pictures from my country last year. My country is France, and last year, and even from the space, we can see on satellite images that we are seeing this kind of big fires, but it's the case everywhere in the world. We have more and more fires, more and more extreme storms as well, hitting numbers of countries in Asia, in Europe, in Africa, in Americas as well. And a lot of floods in different countries. These pictures are from Pakistan last year. But many countries are affected by this kind of phenomenon. So we are sure, of course, that global warming is tangibly impacting the life on Earth, and the life of animals, and the life of humans with this very heavy disruption in the society. Second citation and conclusion and results of this IPCC group. It's a threat for human well-being and planetary health. Of course, it's a danger for us, and we know, and I was saying that in the introduction, we know that climate change and environmental change affect health, and vice versa, the human activities are affecting the environment as well. So there is a kind of bilateral relationship with us, even a trilateral relationship, because if we include the animals, and we are all linked, and healthy ecosystems will lead to healthy health of humans and health of animals as well. This is a principle called One Health, developed since many years by the WHO and promoted by United Nations. But actually, it's an old idea, because the first research on One Health question and the link between ecosystems, humans, and animals has been studied since the 19th century. So it's not new. We all know that. The risk and the threat to the humanity and nature is global. So we can see here some of these risks. First risk is around the loss of species, the biodiversity. We see on this graph that depending on how we increment the temperature, the average temperature in the world, if the baseline is from the pre-industrial time, but if we increase at the end of the century, in 2100, for more than plus 1.5 degrees, and I will talk about this limit, this objective later. We see that we have some species affected in the world, essentially in the center of the Earth, around the equator. If we augment from 2 degrees, we have more, 3 degrees more, 4 degrees more, and we see the impact. The purple aspect is representing the percentage, so we are over 60% of loss of the different species. So it's a huge risk for animals, of course. A huge risk as well for human health. It's the second graph. We can see, depending on the increase in terms of average temperature in the world, where it will be almost impossible to live during a part of the year, or totally in the year. When it becomes purple again, it means that we cannot live, or humans cannot live in these areas, because of the heat and because of the humidity, or the combination of both. So we see that some parts of the world, actually South India is affected, but as well Africa and South and Central America are very affected if we increase too much the temperature. The same on the food, production of food, whether we are talking about maize or cereals in general. And again, the same zone is affected in the center of Earth, depending on the increase of degrees. And the same for fisheries. We have some zone where we will lose most of the population of fish. Species in the middle of Earth as well. So it's clearly a threat, because if we lose the capacity to live in some territories, if we lose the capacity to grow food, or to create food in some regions, of course it will disrupt a lot the activity. One thing I wanted to underline as well is that we are not all equal in front of this climate change. So there is really a question of climate justice, and the reports of IPCC are really demonstrating that the vulnerable communities are historically contributing less to the climate change. So they are less responsible in a way, but they are disproportionately affected by this climate change. And actually, the people who contribute less to the climate change are the ones that are suffering more at the moment. Another important aspect is to say as well that the financial streams and the financial capacities to adapt to this situation are more important in developed countries than in developing countries. And basically, the vulnerable countries are in a double situation of being more affected, even if they didn't contribute too much, and at the same time they don't have the financial capacities to cope with this climate change. So there is really a question of inequalities around climate change that I wanted to underline, whether we are talking about a single population. Here it's for UK, Great Britain, in this graph. I won't describe in detail, but basically it's saying that the most vulnerable population within UK, so the low socioeconomic background population, are contributing less and being affected more by the climate change. But at the global level, it's clearly the global south countries which are more affected, even if they are not at the moment emitting as much greenhouse gas than their colleagues from the north countries. So there is a clear question of inequality that we have to tackle in the way we are transitioning to adapt to this climate change. Third point I wanted to highlight from this report, the greenhouse gas emissions that I mentioned several times will lead to the increase of the global warming, we are sure. And actually the report last year in 2022 and this year in 2023 repeated the same. We need to target a peak of these greenhouse gas emissions by 2025. So it means in less than 2 years. So we don't have a lot of time to change because most of the change will be irreversible. And even if we are cutting tomorrow, we will have certainly some effects that we will have to cope with. And this is the concept of resilience. So we see that we have different scenarios which have been worked by the science, depending on the different emissions we will have in the future. And the temperature is changing. Basically, the increase of the temperature I was talking about from 1.5 degrees to 4 degrees will change depending on the scenario we are taking. But I will come back to this question, but it will affect the population. You can see here different generations. My generation, I was born in 1981, so I'm in the middle. We will already in 2050, when I will be 70 years old, be affected a lot by this climate change, and depending on the scenario, we will be in very different situation with different impact. We see that the new generations, students listening to this lecture, you're not born in 2020, so you're not there, but you're a part of a generation who will be much more affected than mine, and much more affected than previous generations by this climate change. So it's very important to tackle this problem. So it's what the United Nations member states did in 2015 in Paris. They agreed on an objective. This objective was to remain under plus 1.5 degrees by 2100, so by the end of the century, compared to the pre-industrial era. So concretely, it means that we have to decrease our carbon emission or greenhouse gas emission by 7.6% per year. This is the estimation of United Nations, which is actually pretty huge, because this number maybe doesn't mean anything for you, minus 7.6%. But if we look at COVID pandemic, for instance, where we stop, you will remember a lot of activities, a lot of human activities, many stores, shops were closed, many activities were closed and stopping during several months. If we look at the data from 2020, actually the reduction globally has been from minus 6.4%. So you remember the objective is minus 7.6% per year. In 2020, with the COVID lockdown, we only achieved 6.4% reduction. So just to give you an idea of the magnitude of the change we have to do on our activities, it's much more than the year of 2020 when we had the lockdown in COVID time. And actually, if we look at the policies which are at the moment implemented, we see that the implemented policies are putting us on a trajectory that will generate in 2100 a level which is not acceptable and way beyond. I have again an echo. Somebody open the mic. It's Siddhartha. Please. So it's way beyond the limit warming of 1.5, even the limit warming of 2 degrees, and we see that we are not at all on track. One explanation might be as well the way we have approached this problem and this concept of net zero carbon. So the concept of net zero means that you are emitting less carbon than you are capturing. To be simple in the description, it's a bit more complex than that. And actually, the major interpretation we have done in the world is this one. Actually, it's not 100% accurate with what was a net zero concept at the beginning, but most of the organizations and countries and individuals have understood that like this, like we could compensate our emission of carbon by buying some carbon offset bonds. Basically, some companies are claiming, and some airline companies are claiming they are net zero because they are compensating the carbon they are emitting with their planes by buying some programs, for instance, of plantation of trees in Amazonia, for instance, saying that these trees will capture some CO2 in the future, and so they are compensating. But basically, the fact that the timing is not the same between the moment we emit the carbon and the moment we are capturing the carbon make it a bit inaccurate, this concept. And because we don't have international organizations to monitor this carbon offsetting market, and the carbon tax is not completely developed and deployed across the world, then we achieve some strange and stupid situation where people are buying bonds of carbon offsetting without trying to reduce their carbon emissions. So it's a bit like in this cartoon. If we were killing somebody, but at the same time we are buying, in this case, it's a life credit from local surf life saving club, and we are compensating the murderers we are doing on the other side. So you see the absurdity of the model. So now we have said that, of course, we have a situation which is difficult. We have some challenges regarding carbon emissions and climate change. The question is, who is responsible? The usual suspects are, of course, the polluting industries, chemicals, or oil or energy or gas industries, the transport industry as well, with planes, with cars, with boats, are the usual suspects, saying that these sectors are the one who have to make efforts. But actually, what about us in healthcare? We are all professionals working in the healthcare domain. So what is the impact of healthcare, and what could we do as professionals of this sector? All of us, each of us in the perimeter of responsibility we have, but what can we do about healthcare emissions? Well, actually, healthcare is not neutral. A few years ago, in 2019, Healthcare Without Harm, an NGO based in the 5 continents, and Arup, a consultancy company from UK, made an evaluation of what the healthcare systems were emitting and what were the climate footprint of these systems. And actually, it represents 4.4% of the global net emission. So it's not neutral at all. It's a big part of the emissions happening in the world. If it was a country, healthcare systems altogether were a country, it would be the 5th emitter in the world. So it's not negligible. And to give you a comparison, all the healthcare systems emissions together represent more than 500 coal-fired power plants. So it's a big part of the emissions in the world. For instance, it's more than the airplane airfare industry. So the aviation and all the commercial airlines are emitting less than all the healthcare systems. So it's very important to tackle this problem. That's why a few years ago, in 2021, in the COP, so the Conference of Partners organized by the United Nations around climate and environment, decided to launch an initiative. United Nations decided to launch an initiative around the decarbonization and the resilience of healthcare systems. And we have now 60 countries who are committed, and 250 countries who are participating to this initiative. around two commitments, basically. One was to create resilient health system, and the second one was to create low carbon health system. So this initiative from United Nations has been, is coordinated by the WHO, the World Health Organization, and several working groups have been developed. I'm a part, as Raoul was mentioning, I'm part of this initiative. And we have regularly meetings with 250 ministries of health in charge of launching these actions in their own countries to develop climate resilient health system and low carbon health systems. So the concept of resilience, one concept which is sometimes not very well understood. The concept of resilience, if I take the definition of United Nations Office of Disaster Risk Reduction, is the ability of a system, a community or society exposed to hazard to resist, to absorb, to accommodate, and to recover from the effect of a threat in a timely and efficient manner, including through the preservation and restoration of its basic structures and functions. This concept of resilience doesn't mean that we are continuing to operate as we were doing before we are exposed to an hazard or exposed to a change. It means that we are able to assume the same basic structure and functions, even if we are facing some challenges. And actually, the climate change is proposing numbers of challenges, and I've made some illustration at the beginning. And so it means that we need to prepare for being resilient in front of these challenges when they occur, and we don't know exactly when they occur. So WHO, the World Health Organization, has developed an operational framework to work on the climate resilience. I won't describe in detail this graph, but several components are in this climate resilience program. And the healthcare systems are invited to apply and to reflect on the different dimensions of this climate resilience program. First point, of course, of this program is to assess the vulnerability of populations and healthcare systems facing the climate change. Different factors you can see on the graph on the left are influencing the level of vulnerability of the different countries. And these vulnerabilities should be assessed. We need to have an evaluation of these vulnerabilities in order to find some solutions to these vulnerabilities. And we can relate these vulnerabilities with some climate-sensitive health risk. You can see on the graph on the right. Of course, injuries, but as well heat-related illness, respiratory illness. We all know the effect. I won't develop that, but the effect of climate change and environmental change on health. And actually, the analysis of these vulnerabilities lead us to define adaptation plan that could mitigate the risk around the health of the population living in this specific country or this specific region. So this is the way we are preparing the resilience of the system. But at the same time, if we know that we will be facing some very extreme climate events, very extreme situation with, for instance, shortage in the energy supply, shortage in the consumable water we have in our countries. So that's the vulnerability assessment and the adaptation plan I was talking about. We still need to decarbonize healthcare. We still need to reduce the effect because, as we've seen in the different scenarios, we are targeting an increase of the temperature of 1.5 degrees, or at least under the 2 degrees. But if we are not cutting now our global greenhouse gas emissions, we will go beyond that and go to 3 to 4 to 5 degrees of increase of the temperature, and the consequences will be a disaster. So we still have to decarbonize now. And actually, I see there is a typo in this slide. To decarbonize now healthcare. So where healthcare is polluting or emitting some greenhouse gas. So we have a protocol at the international level called the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. And actually, the different sources of emissions are classified in different categories. And if we apply this framework, the greenhouse gas GHG framework, GHG protocol framework, sorry, to hospitals or to healthcare, we see these different sources of pollutions, of emissions that we can have. If we look a bit more in detail, the energy consumption represents more than 50% of the global greenhouse gas emissions. So energy, of course, will be a very important thing, but not only energy, because we can see that the scope 1 is representing basically the energy and the waste within the hospital. The scope 2 is representing the purchase of energy, electricity, or the gas that the hospital is using, and the rest in green, it's about 70%, is about what is from the supply chain, from externally to the hospital, what kind of activities or elements, components of the healthcare activities are contributing to these emissions. So we see that scope 1 and scope 2 are usually in the control of hospitals. Scope 3 are more providers. So for instance, if I take the pharmaceutical, which are accounting for 12% of the emissions, of course, it depends as well on the strategy of pharmaceutical industry. The same for medical technology, with medical instruments and equipment representing 3.3%. So these industries will have a huge role to play as well in the decarbonization of healthcare. But so it means that when we talk with the different ministries of health in this WHO United Nations initiative attached, we are as well talking to pharma company, to medtech company, to try to involve them as well in the same direction, in the same approach. Because of course, if we reduce only 30% of the emissions, is not enough, and we have of course to include the 70 other percent. Which kind of solution we can find to these different emissions? If we talk about energy, which is the main, again, the main source of greenhouse gas emission, we have different strategies. Or we switch the type of energy we are using to renewable one. In the case of some hospitals, some healthcare settings who did the choice to equip themselves by rooftop solar panel, for instance, or to have solar panels in their parking. Or to secure, in the case of the company Philips, for instance, to secure the purchase of renewable energy coming from an external producer of energy. In this case, it was a wind-based energy in Netherlands. They have built a power purchasing agreement, which guarantee the provision of Philips in wind-generated electricity. Which help to switch to renewable. Another strategy about energy could be to increase the efficiency or the efficacy of the energy we are consuming. It's the case for building, for instance. We know that our buildings are not enough isolated and are losing a lot of heat or cool, depending on the location on Earth. But doing some basic work on the isolation of this building, we can save a lot of energy. The same for lighting, for instance, using some LED instead of classic bulb would reduce drastically the consumption of electricity. So this kind of approach are as well doable for healthcare systems. And the last strategy on energy could be on sobriety, what I call the sobriety, the fact that we change the behaviors of people to try to save some energy in switching off some devices, in downsizing the heat or the cool system, depending on where we are, and to have basically to adopt a kind of low power mode. But it relies a lot on the individuals working and being in this healthcare setting, of course. So it's a behavior change approach. In terms of transport, we can adopt new type of vehicles, electric vehicles, which are interesting from a greenhouse gas emission point of view, but have as well their own downsides, because, for instance, the battery of these vehicles are using lithium, but as well other types of materials, which are limited as well on Earth. So the question of limitation of greenhouse gas emission is intertwined with other limits and boundaries we have on Earth. The availability, for instance, of certain materials is one question. So there is no pure perfect solution in this domain, and we are always doing some trade-off between the worst solution possible. Of course, again, we can have some behavior change intervention related to the public transport, but it relies on the willingness of people. In terms of transport as well, digital could help because digital health or telemedicine avoid a number of travels and trips from patients and from employees, doctors or nurses, commuting every day to the hospital, but as well the patients. In the case of Kasturba Hospital in Manipal, some patients are doing 10 or 12 hours of car or truck or bus to come to the hospital. Of course, telemedicine could avoid a few of these transport and a few of these emissions. But again, there is no perfect solution. The digital carbon footprint at worldwide level is around 4% as well, a bit like healthcare systems. So more we are increasing our digitalization, more we are increasing as well the emissions related to that. So it's a trade-off to compare what are the emissions now and what will be the emissions after the digitalization. And we have to make some effort in the digital industry as well to eco-design our solutions and to find new models for softwares and digital solutions. Again, there is no perfect solution. We always have to do trade-off and to compare. The waste as well. Here I put on this slide this good video. I put the link actually on the top. I think I will share the slide so you will have access. I encourage you to see the video. So Maria is a patient who had a breast cancer, and she had a surgery for breast cancer. And actually, she put on this video all the materials used for the surgery of the removal of one of her breasts. And actually, we can see the volume of waste which is generated by a surgery like this. It's a complex surgery, yes, but it's a surgery only for one patient, and we can see the waste as well generated by that. So we have some effort to do on the waste management. Countries like Denmark, for instance, in Europe, have decided to ban completely the plastic packaging in their hospitals. So it's a way as well to reduce the waste, but as well to reduce the impact of this waste, because we know that plastic is very difficult to recycle and actually polluting and contributing to the pollution much more than other types of material. And then we have the supply chain I was talking about before, and we have to engage. And some pharma and medtech companies have taken already some initiatives around green chemistry, for instance, for pharma industry. Around the fact that constructor of medical device, or in this case it's a scanner, are trying to use less consuming energy devices and to use less materials. I was talking about the fact that some materials were lacking and limited as well on Earth. So some initiatives have been launched, and some trade associations in Europe, in the US, in different parts of the world have launched some initiative on the sustainability of these two industries, pharma and medtech, to contribute to this worldwide effort. The other aspect is as well on localism. I took the example of food. Food in an hospital is representing a lot of emissions as well. If all hospitals were switching to local food or local garden, even some hospitals you can see on this picture are developing their own gardens to contribute to the food system inside the hospital. This as well reduce a lot the gas emission. So that's total for me. Thank you very much for your attention. It was a bit longer than expected, but I tried to cover a number of topics. I was not able to go in deep, so please ask questions. I would be very pleased to discuss with you around these items. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Julian. I think you covered a lot of topics and a very broad range of topics, starting from health all the way to environment. I'll hand over the podium to platform to Dr. Neeti, who obviously has a lot of questions. So over to you, Dr. Neeti, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Rahul, and also thank you, Julian. I think it was really, really appreciated that you shared in your lecture, firstly, the scale of the problem, and then all the way down to the potential solutions. And really, as a health systems researcher, I really appreciated all of the connections that you drew to sectors even outside of health that we don't necessarily traditionally think of, where both the problems and the solutions can often lie. We have already quite a few questions actually from the audience. So I'll first, take those to you, and then please keep them coming. Please share all of your any additional comments, any additional thoughts that occur to you. Even if they're not in a question format, please do share them in the chat so we can have a very vibrant discussion while we have Julian here for the lecture. Thank you. And the first question I have for you, Julian, from the audience is with regard to this, you mentioned both digital technologies as well as logistics and how both of them have a role to play. And actually somebody has asked about, the trade, how do they compare with each other? So how much of an impact can physical logistics and AI be in terms of reducing healthcare emissions and lowering carbon emissions among, in hospital settings and healthcare settings? And if telehealth could be considered a substandard solution from the point of view of physicians who might need to assess patients physically, and can we sort of compare the benefits from digital technologies that might accrue in terms of emissions with the healthcare necessities and the physical approach?
Thank you. There are several questions in this question, but I will try to answer. As I said, there is no perfect solution. So we are always comparing two situations, two different or two or more several options to do the same process or to do the same action. So of course, digital can be or telemedicine or teleconsultation could be a solution to avoid some transport. What we do usually to see if it's worthwhile or not is to compare the emissions the greenhouse gas emissions produced when we are in classic mode and the one we have with a telehealth mode. The quantification of greenhouse gas emissions, I didn't present that because it's a bit technical, but we have several techniques to do that, and we can actually create a number behind this practice, a number in terms of tons of CO2 and tons of greenhouse gas emission that we emit in a certain manner or certain organization of the healthcare services, and we can do the same for a digital version of that, where people would not take a truck, a bus, or a car to come to the hospital or the doctor to come to the patient. But we will, of course, if we are doing a teleconsultation, use a data center, use some connectivity network, which are themselves consuming a lot of electricity. And depending on the country where you are, the electricity is produced in different manners. In India, most of the electric production is coal-based. In my home country, France, which is very atypical in the world, is nuclear power. So we have different sides. Nuclear is almost not emitting CO2 or greenhouse gas emission. Coal is emitting a lot, one of the most polluting source. It doesn't mean that globally India is emitting more than France. It means that on this specific case, we will have to assess a coal-based electricity expenditure and emissions related to that, with petrol consumption of cars, bus, or ambulance, or other type of thing. So we can definitively compare two different situations and see if it's worthwhile or not. Globally, in all the evaluation I've seen, digital health or telemedicine is competitive in terms of emissions. It's competitive compared to the classic manner. But of course, it's limited in terms of use case you can include in that. Not all patients can be seen by doctors via telehealth. It's impossible because a dermatologist certainly will have the need to be beside the patients to assess a skin issue, for instance, or to have a look precisely, even if we have tools for that, for remote assessment. But some case, some disease, some specialties, some doctors will prefer to be beside the patient. So we cannot apply to that to all the volume of patients. So we have to compare if it's worthwhile the investment of digital health for the part of patients and the part of use case in the hospital that we will be able to treat via this digital mode, compared to the classic manner to do things. So again, we are always comparing different situations, making trade-off and making choices. But at least the main question was to have this work of assessment of the emissions, because from until now, most of the hospitals, and still now actually, most of the hospitals are not monitoring this kind of parameter. It's not part of their dashboard of piloting their healthcare system. So the main message of the ATTACH initiative by UN and WHO is to tell to the hospital manager, to tell to the healthcare system manager at the ministry level, take that in account when you decide about the design of your healthcare services and the organization of your healthcare services, because it's very important to decrease rapidly the emissions of healthcare systems. So no perfect answer. I don't know if I answered the question, but usually digital is helping, but not adaptable to any case.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think the key takeaway for me anyway is that there aren't any silver bullets that are going to solve the problem entirely. We just have a series of imperfect solutions that will hopefully incrementally get us to where we want in terms of both lowering emissions, but also focusing on appropriate care for our patients. You mentioned some examples from Europe, and I think that's where the inspiration for this question is about what are the steps that Europe is taking and how can India contribute towards lowering the methane effects? And also if there are sort of Europe and India sort of partnerships that are occurring in this area about assessing impacts, like you just mentioned, but also identifying some solutions.
As I said, in the ATTACH initiative, which is a main worldwide initiative on this question of decarbonization of healthcare, well, actually, you have two types of countries. Countries who have committed with a date and a percentage of reduction of emission. So 60 plus countries now, almost 70, have committed with saying a date, for instance, 2030, 2040, or 2050 as a or deadline to decrease the emission by 30, 40, 50, 60%, depending on the countries. So you have 60 plus countries who did that to put a number and a date, a percentage of reduction and a date. And then the rest of the United Nations member states are members of this initiative as well, but without putting this number and this date. So it's the case of India. India is member of the government of India, and the Ministry of Health are member of the ATTACH initiative, but didn't indicate a detailed date and a detailed reduction of emission percentage within their action. But they are committed to first create this vulnerability assessment I was talking about the resilience, and to set up an adaptation plan. And they are committed as well to decrease the healthcare system carbon emission. The thing is that for the countries who have put a date and percentage, most of them have already built a kind of plan to engage their hospitals, the private hospital, the private industry. All of these stakeholders are working in different ways and have different incentives to do so. So they have already defined this. In the case of countries like India, who didn't commit specifically to a date and a percentage, it means that they are still working on this potential plan. What we can do is starting from the micro level. And actually, we started with one of the students of MHA program, a work on the assessment of the emissions of Kasturba Hospital, for instance, at very micro level. And this is the first way to start. Each hospital, each healthcare setting, but even each pharma or medtech company, and we have another project with another student in MHA program as well on that, should develop this assessment and should develop a plan to reduce the carbon emission. So there is the macro level, a worldwide level of negotiation between states. There is a national level where a government should put in place some laws, regulation, incentives. So you have different way to motivate your stakeholders, but the governments can have different approach on that. To involve, engage all the public hospital, private hospital, and industry in this approach. And then at the micro level, we can, of course, create that. For instance, a Manipal hospital like Kasturba could have its own initiative to look into that. Of course, it won't have all the control, because all the emissions are not related directly to something this hospital is controlling, but it can already start the work. So that's why the main mission we are doing with the research group in this WHO initiative attached is to support the government in trying to give them some ideas on the strategy they could adopt, the plan they could set up to involve everybody, and the argument they have to develop towards an hospital, toward an industry, to engage them in this approach, and then to try to disseminate this approach into the country. So in India, it's a big country, so it's more difficult, it takes time, but every time personally I meet with hospital managers or hospital groups in any country in India, but in other countries, we are talking about this question and putting only the seed of put that on your radar because it's very important. Put that in your dashboard, put that in your objective of operations and management of your hospital. It's the first message to do. So any of us can do this work of awareness raising, I would say.
Right, thank you. We have a question from one of our students about the social justice and climate justice that you brought up. The question says, can social justice assessments be used as a framework for the adaptation policy documents? And if keeping this in mind, how can countries ensure that communities that are already facing disadvantages or inequities are not harmed by the measures taken by healthcare systems to decarbonize?
So it's a tricky question because again there is no silver bullet, to take your expression. At the worldwide level, global south is disadvantaged in front of global north. Inside the country, the vulnerable populations are disadvantaged compared to richest part of the population. So we have different solutions for different level again of issue, of challenges. At the international level, so the difference between the developed countries and countries in development from the south, there is a fund that has been discussed since many years, and last COP27 in Egypt finalized the agreement on the setup of a fund, an international fund. It's $100 billion. To finance the transition of global south countries. So this money coming from global north countries and will help the global south countries to finance their environmental transition on healthcare, but as well on other domain, of course. This is a way to solve a part of the climate justice issue, which was basically we are in this situation because of the developed countries. They are mainly the responsible. And so now they have to compensate by financing the one more affected, the global south countries in that. At the national level or local level, in the case of socioeconomic or social inequalities in front of that, this is something very tricky to address because some regions in the country, India is vast, for instance. Not all states will be equivalent in terms of facing this climate change challenge. The coastal India will for sure be exposed to risk that the central India won't be exposed to, and vice versa. I would say, because of course the heat or the drought we have in some regions of India are not affecting the same, the South India, for instance, which is a bit more wet. And the floods cannot come in some regions, but in other regions. So we will have to, the ministries in each country will have to define this level of exposure, this level of vulnerability. It's exactly the objective of the tool developed by WHO to assess state by state, but I would say district by district as well. If we take the state of Karnataka, Bangalore situation is not the same as Udupi situation or Manipal situation. So, of course, it should be assessed at the very local level, and then to find mitigation action or mitigation strategies which are adapted to the vulnerability you observe at the very local level. So again, we have to work in micro, meso, and macro level with different strategies, with different tools, money transfer for the macro level, worldwide level, vulnerability assessment, And this vulnerability assessment will lead to adaptation plan, which will be very differentiated depending on the situation. And the funding from the national government to these different locations should be adapted in function of the exposure to the risk. So it's again looking into the detail, what are the needs and the risk for each district, I would say, in India.
Yeah, I think it's the question is a good one, and it's also an important reminder that sometimes the talk about emissions and also decarbonization, regardless of the sector, can become too technical. But that equity is something that has to be prioritized, as you said, at the global level, at the national level, at the regional level, but also at the sub-national level in each district administrations and maybe even below that. So that's a timely reminder. But I did wonder, of course, we're situated here in India, about, we have a vibrant private healthcare sector who are responsible for delivery. And you already mentioned a couple of the, big hospitals, private hospitals that we have here in Bangalore. But there's also, a vibrant private sector for a lot of in digital technologies. Again, we're sitting here in Karnataka, in Bangalore, which is, considered the Silicon Valley of India. There are a whole range of, there's an ecosystem of startups that are growing, as well as a whole range of pharmaceutical industries, which is again very vibrant in India. And I'm really wondering, what role do you see for the private sector, and what kind of initiatives they can take, and how much of a role there is for the government to work with the private sector, and how should it really be operationalized?
Well, for a private company, the long term is always an issue. For a private company usually is working more on the short or medium term and building some plans and strategies for short and medium term. Long term is rarely consideration in the definition of a strategy of a company, especially the small one. The large one could have more longer views, but the small one is more difficult. So to expect from the industry spontaneous reaction or spontaneous adaptation to this issue, we rely only on the values and on the willingness of the managers of this company to do so. But actually governments or hospitals have as well a way to constrain or to engage these partners into decarbonization. For instance, in Europe, we have some purchase criteria of hospitals and healthcare systems as a whole. For instance, some countries have decided to force any hospital or any healthcare system player in their country to include in their tenders, call for tenders, each time they are buying something, whether it's a medtech, whether it's a drug, whether it's energy, whether it's other thing, the component of environmental criteria. So the fact that the decision on selecting this company or this company will be done as well, beside the quality of the proposal, the price, or this kind of criteria, but decide as well on environmental criteria. So the less emitting solution will have priority in this purchase, and the choice will be done for this type of company. So this has come has done a very good effect actually on the market in Europe, because most of the companies, I was mentioning Philips, but it's not the only one, have seen this change in the way to procure from the healthcare systems. Public and private actually are doing that sometimes. And so they have adapted their solution, and they have built a strategy and a roadmap for themselves to green a bit their products in order to meet these criteria, environmental criteria, in the procurement process. So it's one way to create incentives, if you want, for the industry and the private sector to be engaged in this approach. Another approach, is not the two only ones, but another approach could be to have a low regulation around that. We have for long regulation for pharma industry, for instance, they cannot release chemicals in a river. now, so everybody knows that, and the pharma are complying with this because it's a norm, it's a law, and they have audits time to time. The same should happen on other types of pollutions, and the greenhouse gas emission could be one into their processes. So it's basically to develop a bit more the regulation around the environmental responsibility of the companies. And we could have audit system or an enforcement system by the governments around that. So it's a way of the regulation. So you have the way of the financial, in a way, financial incentive in the sense that you will be more competitive if you're greener with the procurement. You have the way of regulation, which is a second potential way to force the industry to adopt a few behaviors. These are two options, but I'm sure we can find more. And actually, the research we are doing at the moment are trying to catch more options, more strategies to engage the stakeholders.
So I see we're at time, but I'm going to leave with one last question, Julian, if I can ask you to very briefly respond about what we have a lot of students here in the audience, and I want to ask just what, as individual lay citizens, how can we contribute to sort of reducing emissions, particularly in our healthcare interventions?
Well, again, here we have many students who will be in the near future hospital manager or healthcare managers in companies or in healthcare settings. I believe personally that this generation, as this new generation, will be more impacted than us or than the previous generations, that they have to take into account this aspect. And when they will be in the position of taking decision and managing an healthcare company or an healthcare or an hospital, to take that in account. At the individual level, of course, we can try to reduce our individual level in healthcare. I mean, we can try to reduce our use of healthcare services in general, because sometimes we are relying too much, I think, on the healthcare services to solve some health issues which are not necessarily requiring the intervention of a nurse or doctor. So we can limit that, but of course, if you have a disease, you cannot avoid to go to the hospital. This lady, Maria, was mentioning he's working with patient association around pressuring the hospitals to decrease the waste or decrease the single use of some material used in surgery. I'm working with another federation of patients, the World Federation for Incontinence, for instance. The incontinence problem is huge in the world. It's not a very glamour topic, but actually the problem of incontinence is very huge in the world. Number of patients is huge, and the devices or the products that are proposed by the industry to these patients are single use, all of them, and most of them include some polluting components. So this World Federation of Incontinence patients is at the moment launching a big campaign to pressure from the consumer side, so the patients consuming this type of product, pressuring the industry in order for them to change the design of their product, both in terms of single-use versus reusable products, and the type of material they are using for this kind of products. I find it very efficient when the consumers are claiming that there is an issue in an industry and pushing this industry to change the way they are producing. It can work. Of course, the industry is powerful as well, so it's a relation that you have to fight. And the president of this World Association is pretty active on that. But it's another way to pressure the industry. It could be the same for hospitals. The patient could claim that. But again, we have first to convince the population, because even if around here the lecture we can have convince people, I'm not sure it's already the case for most of the population. So we still have to evangelize a bit. So the role of each individual could be to talk about it. More and more you talk about it, and you give demonstration that we have an issue. All what I present today are facts. It's not hypothesis. The problem we are facing is huge. We are sure of that. Thousands of scientists are claiming that we are in a very bad situation and we have to do something now, at least before 2025. And these are facts. So more you communicate these facts, the scientific facts, more you convince people and more you generate reaction and actions toward decarbonization.
Thank you, Julian Wen, for highlighting why climate resilience is such an important concept for the healthcare system and offering some potential solutions and discussing, the pros and cons of each of them with humility and pragmatism. So thank you for that. And with that, I'll hand it back to Rahul.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, please, Rahul, take it away and conclude today's session. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you so much, both Julian and Dr. Neeti Rao, for being able to host and provide this lecture. Julian, I'm sure there is a lot more that you could talk about, and of course, Dr. Neeti also has immense knowledge providing with this, and we could probably organize a small think tank on holding a seminar on this. It's very important and very knowledgeable. So saying this, I would again like to thank our Professor Rajani Prasanna Endowment, through whose endowment we have been receiving and organizing this lecture series. I thank our Chief Patron Sri D.A. Prasanna Sir, and looking forward to this chapter and this YouTube channel, to host this on the YouTube channel for future purposes. Thank you so much. Looking forward to hearing from you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.